Hi, my name is Ted Elliott. Welcome to this month's webinar from Job Science, the TED Talk. The TED Talk series is really designed to talk about some interesting topics and to put job science in a thought leadership position when it comes to where recruiting is going. To remind you, our mission here at Job Science is really to address the change in the economy, be an innovator in the gig economy when it comes to recruitment, and deal with the changing workforce. As companies like Uber and Upwork and Airbnb change the way people work, engage, sell, we think that these things are going to directly affect the recruitment world. And it's our mission at Job Science to allow our customers to be the winners in the new economy. To that end, we just released our summer release, also known as the Shark release, that had some early artificial intelligence in it. You can see from the downloads in today's webinar that you can download some flyers on that piece of our content. I also have some links that are available to you for our tuning guide so you can see how you can take advantage of these functions. Greg Savage, thanks for joining us here on TED Talks. We're really excited about having you talk to North America. Greg, I know a lot about what you've done globally in recruitment, but do you mind sharing with our audience a little of your history?
Sure, Ted, and it's a real pleasure to be with you and to work with Job Science again, which of course we've done in the past in Australia. Look, I am a pretty sad case in the sense that I've been in recruitment for 37 years, Ted. I know that's a shock for a young man like yourself, but that was 15 years I started in recruitment before the internet was invented. But it's given me a wonderful opportunity to view the changes that the industry has been through and all the big so-called disruptors that have come along, like the internet, like social, and now maybe it's artificial intelligence. I worked in the UK. I'm Australian, but I worked in the UK for a few years in the early years. The next big thing was I launched a company with two other guys called Recruitment Solutions in Australia. That was a big success over 10 years. We built it to 250 people across 12 offices and listed through an IPO in the Australian Stock Exchange. So that was exciting and spawned a lot of great recruiters. And then I joined Aquent, which is a North American company. They're based out of Boston. Great people. They're a marketing recruitment company or staffing agency, as you'd call it in the US. And they had offices all across America, but they also had 5 offices internationally. And my job was to run the international business. And over the next 10 years, and I was with them 10 years, we had a great ride. We grew those 5 offices to 35 in 17 countries across Asia, Australasia, Europe. And that was all my responsibility, and we had a lot of success and a few failures, so, as you'd expect. And when the Lehman Brothers crisis came in 2008, 2009, it gave me the opportunity to engineer a management buyout of 10 of Aquent's company with their support, and indeed they remain shareholders of this new company called Firebrand, which had 10 offices in 8 countries, and we grew that and sold it in 2012. And since then, which is now 4 or 5 years, I've been consulting to the recruitment industry, but mostly I'm on the board of staffing companies. In fact, I'm currently on the board of 14 staffing companies in 3 countries, and that keeps me really, really busy, but also most importantly connected to what people are doing, what's working, what's not working across Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and Asia. And I do a bit of speaking, as you know, Ted, and that brings me to today.
Yeah, I'm really excited that we have you here. Now, I've been in part of your live presentations that you do around the world, where a lot of people have predicted the demise of staffing, but you believe that we're in the golden era, or that it's awaiting us. Why do you believe there's a golden era of recruitment ahead of us?
Yes, Ted, that shocks people when I say that. And I guess I'll preface that by saying that's not just a headline grabber. I'm actually investing in staffing companies. And I wouldn't do that out of a romantic love for recruitment. I believe the right people with the right strategy are going to thrive. You know, our industry, if you pick up LinkedIn and read there, you will see so many people criticizing staffing. You will see people claiming we're about to disappear and be Uberized. I always laugh when people say we're going to be Uberized, given that Uber lost $2 billion last year and their CEO just got fired. So I don't think anyone wants to be Uberized, but our industry is actually growing at 7% per annum globally. It's worth $400 billion US. There's no sign of a cataclysmic disruption from job boards or social media or anything else. But having said that, There is the influence of artificial intelligence coming down the pipe. In fact, it's here already, and I think that will change our industry. So there is a golden era, but only for some of us, Ted. There is also a dismal future for many recruiters who don't evolve, because we're entering an era of acute talent shortages. I know we've got that in the US. I mean, you can have high unemployment in some areas and massive talent shortages in other areas, of course. And big change over the last 10 years is that boards are actually realizing that talent is the epicenter of competitive advantage. They've always said, people are our biggest asset. And frankly, that was a lie. They never treated them that way. But now it's changing. And we're seeing that in-house recruitment is changing, where the shift is to delivering outcomes, i.e. talent, not so much saving cost on agencies. Standard sourcing channels that we've all used, like job boards and LinkedIn, which I consider to be old school, are becoming less effective. So the future is wonderful for those recruiters who evolve. And when I say evolve, there's many areas they will evolve, and you'll ask me that question, I'm sure. But the secret is all about candidate acquisition. If we become skilled at accessing candidates in this fluid, changing environment where candidate behavior is changing too, then companies will pay our fees. So the future is great, but only for a small, well, not a small percentage, but I would say a minority of recruiters. What's going to happen is the majority of recruiters will not survive over the next 3 to 5 years because they won't have the tools needed. A smaller group will become what I call a walking dead. They will stagger from month to month, living off the edges. And then a minority will thrive like never before. And that's what I like to talk about, because there is a great future, but only for some of us.
As you look at the different companies that you're involved with and the industry, what are the first signs of the recruiter that's going to be left behind in this change that you're seeing?
Well, it's I call them yesterday's heroes, which is a little bit sad and cruel, but really it needs to be said, because funnily enough, the recruiters who are at greatest threat are the ones who have been successful in the past, Ted. They've got a good track record. They, in inverted commas, know how to recruit. They are continually saying, if we just keep doing it the old way, it still works. And I think some of the hallmarks, for want of a better word, are they hide behind digital. Digital has changed our world, and it's given us a million different ways to communicate and to influence and to engage. But it's also allowed some recruiters to dumb the industry down and to hide behind email and technology. They've lost their influencing skills. And in actual fact, I'm going to talk about this when you're asking about artificial intelligence. The drudgery, the hack work, is going to be taken out of recruitment and staffing by machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we should embrace that. But what it leaves behind is the selling and the influencing skills. And the yesterday's hero, they hide behind email. They don't engage. They focus only on active candidates. By that, Ted, I mean those candidates that come to them. And that's no longer going to work. I mean, it just does not work to the degree we need. We have to be very active in going out and finding candidates, and also creating a brand where they come to us. They're in real life. They're phobic about in real life. They are social media phobic on the one hand. In other words, they won't touch it. They say it's trivial, or they spend a lot of time on social media wasting their time without any strategic plan about engaging. They're very resistant to change. They're always sort of clinging to the past. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of sort of old school recruiter skills that need to be reinvented and burnished and brought back to life. And I'll talk about those. But there are plenty of those things. I've actually noticed that a lot of people across the world are spending more time getting better at things that they shouldn't be doing at all. And that's what we've got to stop doing. They don't upskill. And perhaps worst of all, they still treat candidates like cattle. They say they don't, but they treat candidates like cattle. And by that, I mean they treat them with disdain. They don't return their calls. They don't engage. And then they wonder why they can't attract new candidates. So that's yesterday's hero, and they are on the way out.
As you look at the top factors of change that are required to thrive in the future, especially in light of the fact that things like artificial intelligence are going to replace some of the things that recruiters do, what are those? What are the top 2 or 3 things that a recruiter needs to change in order to thrive in the future?
Yeah, well, I think to answer that question, I'd like to, if I may, Ted, leap into talking about artificial intelligence for a moment, because while I'm not any kind of global expert on that, I have done my research, and I have been and looked at a company in the UK who who implemented a little tool called Pocket Recruiter, which is a matching engine. Incredible results they've got out of that. And this is my take on it, which leads into answering your question. And bear in mind, those of you listening, that artificial intelligence is not something for the future. It is with us now, and companies are engaging with technology in recruitment and staffing right now. We've got the machines identifying candidates. I mean, here's something that will shock some of your listeners. I reckon that artificial intelligence will actually replace sourcing as a human role. I think we will find that algorithms and tools will be designed, already are being designed, that will identify candidates via digital better than we can. And so that kind of arcane sourcing skill that people are so excited about will in fact become mundane. And machines can screen, they can match faster and more accurately than us. They can do that without bias. They can manage logistics, set up interviews, and chatbots are now screening, asking questions, answering questions, even assessing and starting to interview via video technology. So the message out of all of that is this. We don't ask the question, is recruitment evolving or is staffing evolving? That's a trite question because it clearly is. The question we have to ask is, are we evolving? And what it leads me to believe is, ironically, Ted, artificial intelligence itself is not a threat to agency recruiters. We should embrace it. We should employ the technology. We should allow it to soak up all the drudgery and all the hack work. And what we've got to do is to get better at the things that only human beings can do. And they are the selling skills, the influencing skills, the persuading, the advising, the consulting, the building of reputation and brand. And these things that I've just mentioned are actually what modern recruiters have got increasingly less skilled at. And so I think that recruiters will lose their jobs, but not because they're replaced by machines, but because the part of the job that has value, the recruiters have no skill in. So what's got to happen is recruiters have got to get better at how they find candidates, because machines will find them on the internet, but the human beings have got to recruit them. And that's an engagement question. And a modern outreach, which is something recruiters are so poor at, and converting them into active candidates. We've got to change the way we win clients. It's more about social selling, and people misunderstand me on that, Ted. They think I'm saying, oh, so we're going to just get our clients by tweeting and sending out emails. No, we're still going to have to sell in the old sense, but whereas cold calling was the door opener, now social selling and digital engagement is the door opener, and then we'll have to engage in the old ancient art of telephone selling or face-to-face selling. We've also got to change our self-image with branding, and change the attitude of the type of business we accept, because if we accept low margin, high volume, digital-driven sort of screening type recruitment on a contingent basis, well, machines will do that much quicker and cheaper than a human being can. We've got to focus on the high value consultative type recruitment work and focus on those areas where there are a shortage of candidates, and then become world champions at finding those candidates. That's where it's going, Ted.
Think about the candidate pool changing and their behavior changing. How do you think your sourcing strategies need to change? I know that people do sourcing in different parts of the world in different ways. So what are your thoughts about how the recruiter has to change their game based on the candidate?
Well, actually, that is a really interesting question. And I would love to ask your audience a question on that, because I spent quite a lot of time in the US with Aquent, going to the Boston HQ and some of their other offices. I've got a lot of recruiters I engage with over there, but most of my experience is in Asia, Australia, and Europe. And there, mostly people get their candidates from job boards, from LinkedIn, and maybe from their internal database. So I'd love us to do a poll of your listeners to find out how they get their quality candidates, because I think that would be a key thing for us to understand. But to answer your question, I'll start with a kind of strange statement. People need to understand that recruitment has merged with marketing. We think of staffing as a sales-driven industry. Sales will always be critical. I mean, I can hardly think of a job, commercial job where it isn't. So that's a given. But it's merged with marketing. And in terms of our history of looking for candidates, it's always been a staffing industry sort of tactic to try and gain the candidate's attention, right? By running ads and or phoning them up and what have you. Attention. Now it's about understanding their intention. We've got to get so much smarter. We've got to understand that we need to use consumer marketing tactics to engage with with candidates, because candidates are looking for jobs like they look for consumer purchases. They are trawling through jobs on their phones. They are looking for the employer brand of the employer. They are, for example, going to review sites. And so we've got to start to think about not only dealing with candidates who are currently looking for jobs, and there's nothing wrong with those people, they're not a different brand of human beings, but we've got to start engaging with people long before they're looking for jobs. Just as consumer marketers engage with us and build up a profile with us, engage with us long before we're actually going to buy, because they are seducing us into the purchase. And so we've got to use data, we've got to build communities. What we've really got to do is move from the reactive to the proactive. So that in a nutshell, and of course there are many tactics around that, which we can talk a little bit about, but it's probably going to take up more time than we've got today. But the overall thrust of it is we've got to become expert marketers. Every recruitment organization should have front and foremost digital marketing as it's in its DNA. But I also think that every individual recruiter should treat themselves as a little personal digital marketing machine and build their personal brand, because we need to have the best candidates able to find us, not only us find the best candidates.
So Greg, as you use the word seduction when you're talking about the candidates, what do you think are some of the best ways to conduct the seduction, to engage in the seduction?
Well, recruiters often say to me, Ted, LinkedIn InMail doesn't work, I don't get any response. Well, I'm connected to 13,000 recruiters on LinkedIn, and I get a headhunting InMail every week. And so that gives me, which is interesting, because I'm 60 years old and I'm an independent, self-employed person, and I'm not really a recruiter. I don't actually place people in jobs, but I get recruited for jobs in other countries, paying £6,000 a year for a junior recruiter, which just shows you that there is no finesse, there's no sophistication, there's no tailored approach. So when I talk about seduction, it really comes down to this. As I mentioned, I think it's going to be easier to find people. Everyone's digital, everyone's on the internet. The concept of privacy is almost beginning to disappear in the modern world. You can find anyone, that's not true, but you can almost find anyone. And machines will do that more effectively. Algorithms will find people. That's not going to be the hard part of recruitment. That's not going to be the value. Companies can do that for themselves. The value is going to be engaging with them and converting them and bringing them into the job search net. And that's why I use the word seduction. And people often get shocked because they think of it from a romantic point of view. And of course, I don't mean that, but I do mean some of the similar skills: empathy, communication, listening skills, telling a story. And that's what you need to do, because you're going to have some bespoke outreach to connect with someone and then get their trust and bring them. These are all the same things that one would use in seduction. Not that I would know, Ted, maybe you would. But they are the things that we need to do to win candidates and then manage them through the process. And that's what clients will pay us for. So you've got to be a finder of talent, but you've also got to have the skill, the sophisticated skill to, number one, find them. Yes, that's machines are going to help with. 2, engage with them. And 3, convert them. In fact, I've actually introduced into many of the companies I'm working with a new KPI, which we call the SCR. It's your seduction conversion rate. In other words, the success you have when approaching target candidates. And that's a skill that very few companies are training people on. And you can see that because you're seeing people send out spam emails and then wondering why candidates don't respond. They don't respond because it isn't tailored, and they're getting lots of those. And it's a crass approach. It needs to be far more sophisticated. And maybe InMail isn't the best way to go. There are many, many other channels you can use to connect with a potential candidate.
Greg, if you're excellent at the seduction process and you become a talent magnet, I've heard you use that term, talent magnet, before. What are you referring to when people have to be a talent magnet, and what does it mean to be a talent magnet?
That's a great question, Ted, and it proves to me that when you came to listen to me speak in Australia, you actually were paying attention, so I appreciate that. Think of it like this. Recruiters have to be skills hunters. Now, I use that phrase because the word hunter suggests somebody who goes out and finds the prey. And of course, I'm talking there about sourcing, digital search, and approaching people and proactively searching out the best candidates. And there's 1,000 tactics around that people need to learn. But the flip side, which is almost the mirror image, is this talent magnet. And what that is this idea of inbound inquiries and of creating a brand and treating, for example, LinkedIn more as a branding platform than a sourcing platform, which shocks people. But the way I think of it is that LinkedIn is becoming less effective as a traditional sourcing platform. After all, they're squeezing us and making us pay more. It's overcrowded. People are taking their keywords out of their profiles because they're sick of recruiters, approaching them. So why not treat LinkedIn as a branding platform which is free? And by that, I mean putting out great content, engaging with people, and being active on a number of platforms, not only LinkedIn, so that people see you through thought leadership, through sort of professional output. People recognize you as a leader in your field. And the reason that so few recruiters will do this is, A, they don't get that this is the way the world's moving. What people crave across the world in any sphere these days, with what do they call it, fake news and everything else, people crave authenticity. And clients and candidates alike are often saying about our industry, all recruiters are the same, which is not true, but that's what they say. It's very hard to differentiate. Through digital branding and content marketing, which is really what I'm talking about, you can build a brand where the best candidates will come to you. They will seek you out. And that will mean that you can start to engage with that candidate on an exclusive basis, which is a key, and actually act as that candidate's agent and represent them in the market. And that's where the value lies, because you will have access to candidates that your clients and your competitors don't. So that's the concept of talent magnet, Ted, and I can talk more about how you do that when we talk about building personal brand, if we get to that later on.
Ray, when we do talk about building a personal brand, what are some tips you can give recruiters to build out that brand? What are 2 or 3 things that are must-haves?
Okay, well, as you know, I never limit myself to 2 or 3 things, Ted, so I'm probably going to be 4 or 5, but I'll try and keep it quick. First of all, you've got to understand this. You've got to think, where does my audience live? Well, first of all, who's my audience? And the audience typically is, yes, clients, but I'm focusing on candidates more because I think that's the key. What kind of candidates have value in the market and are in my specialization? And then where do they live? And by live, I don't mean physically, I mean online. And then where do they engage? What platforms do they use? And then you say, okay, I'm going to take a long-term view. That's the biggest tip. One of the biggest tips is that we are a very short-term industry, and I'm one of the worst. Over all those years of running recruitment companies, I was all about how many interviews have you arranged today? How many placements have you got this week? What are our numbers this month? I've said that more than any person on this webinar, I'm absolutely sure. But we've got to start taking a longer-term view, because building brand is a long-term consistency required. And you need to build an audience, which you will do on those channels. Now, those channels might be LinkedIn, it might be Twitter, it might be a blog where you build a subscriber audience, as I have done personally, or it might be something different. I mean, McDonald's, for example, in this country are recruiting all their staff through Snapchat, right? Because they're millennials, right? So those people love Snapchat. And if you want to apply for a job with McDonald's in Australia, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, you go to Snapchat, you switch on a filter, which puts you in a McDonald's uniform, and then you answer some questions. And they're hiring all their staff that way because they've worked out that that's where their audience is. They're not going to hire their staff via LinkedIn or Twitter or even Facebook, because those kids are not on Facebook, they're on Snapchat. So then you've got to build a strategy to speak to your audience, and that, of course, is via content. And this is now another whole area where recruiters are not comfortable that they need to. You need to put out insights. You don't have to write War and Peace in a blog, but interesting content. And you need to be generous. That's one of the secrets of building a brand, is that it's not about what you can get in the first instance. It's about what you give in terms of advice, in terms of content, in terms of engagement, sharing other people's content, etc. And slowly then you will build up engagement, which again is the next key thing that people get wrong. People think social media is A, cheap, and B, simple. It's not either of those things, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of input. And particularly when you start building an audience, they will engage with you. Then they won't be saying, hey, can you find me a job? They'll be saying, hey, that was an interesting comment you made on Twitter. Is that really the case? And there'll be a discussion. And you might then lose track of them for 3 or 4 weeks, and then there'll be another comment. And it might take 6 months before it actually gets around to, hey, you seem like a good recruiter. Can you help me find a job? And most recruiters do not have the world view that they're going to spend time on that. But it's ironic because they are wasting time on interviewing inappropriate people that come through other channels, screening them out, wasting time on cold calls where you speak to voicemail. And we've really got to change our thinking. So every recruiter is a mini one-person digital marketing agency. And that is how they will build their brand, through the long-term consistency, authenticity, generosity, and content marketing.
When you think about these brand building recruiters that can seduce people and become talent magnets, where do you see the technology taking things off their desk? What do you think are the most natural applications of artificial intelligence and technology that will actually change their job and change what they do?
Well, I think, Ted, that sourcing will become, as I mentioned, increasingly automated. I think screening definitely will become automated. I mean, that chatbots will have an involvement. They're already working very effectively. So, you know, the thing about a chatbot is, even if it's in its simplest form, it can ask key knockout questions. So, you know, can you work in Boston? Do you have a degree in medical imaging? And if the answer is no, well, I'm sorry, you're not suitable for this job. Can you apply for something else? So it could screen people out. And that can happen at 10 o'clock at night while the candidate's drinking a beer, you know. And one of the big issues that the candidates have with our industry is they can never get to speak to the recruiter. So screening, and that's just the simplest formats. I mean, chatbots can ask questions, they can video interview, etc. Matching. I mean, actually, there are so many recruiters who are missing huge opportunities because their own internal databases are what I call candidate graveyards. They're literally graveyards. I mean, actually, some of the people in those databases are actually dead, which is sad, but the recruiters wouldn't know because they don't engage with them. And we've now got artificial intelligence and machine learning that becomes much better at sourcing candidates from massive internal databases. So I think it will take away screening, it will take away matching, it will take away logistics like setting up interviews, and give recruiters far more time to do the things I'm talking about: the selling, the influencing, the being a true talent consultant. And this is true of recruiters who are both agency recruiters and in-house. They need to add much more value to the line managers about how they're going to find the best talent. And of course, spending time on brand building. That's how I think it's going to evolve. But, you know, predicting the future is a fool's game, and I do it all the time, which makes me a fool, I guess. But that's what I think is the way it's going to head.
If people have to learn some new tricks in order to be effective in the market, what are some of the old school recruiting skills that you think people forget? I know you mentioned a couple of them earlier on, like actually talking to people and respecting them. Yeah. But what are the top ones that you speak about? Because I know when I've been with you in Australia and other locations, you put together these great masterclasses where you show people what they need to do to be effective. What are some of the highlights on the old school recruiting skills that you want to make sure no one leaves today's webinar without hearing?
Okay, well, to some of the audience, they're going to sound so obvious, but to others, they might be somewhat fresh. I mean, let me break it into two very broad main areas. I call them moments of truth, right? Recruitment is made up of hundreds of moments of truth. They are those little opportunities of interaction with client or candidate where you have the opportunity to influence the outcome. I'll give you a very quick example. I was watching a recruiter the other day typing a 9-paragraph email, and when I looked over her shoulder, she was writing this email to try and convince a candidate to go for a job interview. And when I said to her, did it occur to you to pick up the phone? She looked at me as though I was from another planet. When I said to her, why not have a coffee with this candidate and talk to them about the job if you believe they should go? And she said, I don't have time to have coffee with candidates. And I said, but you have time to write a 9-paragraph email, which has taken you 45 minutes so far. So what I'm talking about is really many, many things, but two of the biggest moments of truth are qualifying job orders, the skill of engaging with a client to end up with a job order that is fillable. Most recruiters these days, I see recruiters receiving a job order via email. It's attached to an email, a job description, and then they start looking for candidates. It actually breaks my heart. I literally have to almost bring up my handkerchief and start crying, because why would you work on a job order until you've had a conversation with the client and debated the real reasons that they're looking for somebody, the real job, the priorities of the job, the flexibility. Now, this is recruiting 101, and I started learning it in 1980, but I see many recruiters these days who don't even do that. The other side of it is, of course, the candidate work, where there are many moments of truth. But the first one is at the initial interview, because I like to say finding someone a job is half the battle, getting them to accept it's the other half. And controlling a candidate's likelihood to accept a counter offer, for example, is a nuanced, sophisticated, old school recruiter skill, which starts at the first interview. Again, many recruiters are not bothering with even interviewing people. They're just talking to them on the phone and then spamming their resumes around town. And they wonder why 50% of their job offers get turned down. It's because the influencing skills, the persuading, the advising, the consulting skills have been lost. And so the irony is, the more digital the world's become, the less connected human beings are. Am I right? That is what's happening. And I'm asking recruiters to use digital. You've heard me talk today a lot about artificial intelligence and brand and using digital. Please, yes, we've got to be on the front foot when that comes along, but we've also got to go back to really connecting with candidates and clients, and only working with clients who will engage with us so that we can manage those moments of truth. Really what it boils down to is recruiters have to get paid more often for the work that they do. And that sounds a strange thing to say, but if you sit back, most recruiters don't get paid for about 70% of the work they do, because they work on a contingent basis and because they don't control the process. And it's not going to work going forward, Ted.
So, Greg, what is your view of who has the right DNA to be a future fit recruiter, and how they're going to evolve in the new modern market, or the new golden age that you're speaking about?
Yes, great question, Ted. Well, let me sort of give you a flavor of that. The first thing that I think will be sort of woven into the DNA of a modern recruiter is that they will be a reinventor. They will understand that you're never done as a recruiter. And actually, there's a lot of recruiters who've got 20 years experience, but in truth, they've got 2 years experience 10 times over. They haven't evolved, and that's not going to cut it, right? We have to have people who are living on the edge, who are constantly updating. I gave a talk in Australia, you may have been there, around the country to 10 or 12 cities. And then 9 months later, I was asked to go to the UK and give the same talk. And I thought, great, I'll just give the same talk. But as I got on the plane, I went to the UK and I looked at my notes, I realized that about 30% of what I was talking about was no longer valid. That's how quickly it's changing. So a future fit recruiter is constantly adding to their skills as things change. Skills around sourcing, for example, where new things are coming up all the time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they will be good at sourcing. I said sourcing's dying, but it's not dead, and they've got to be able to find candidates. But more importantly, in a way, is they've got to be these highly skilled seducers, people who can engage, have empathy, build trust, and take their time to bring the best potential candidates into the fold. The other thing I would describe them as is digital natives. Now, what I mean by that is, my 17-year-old son is a digital native in the literal sense, but I'm a born-again digital native, because I recognized 10 years ago that it's the future, and I've got to make myself, so I'm 60 years old almost, Ted. I know you can hardly believe it, but it's true. I've had to willingly go out and become expert in the digital technologies that affect our business. And a lot of recruiters are ignoring that or avoiding it, saying it's for the young ones. It's not. Go and get yourself a reverse mentor, a young person, and learn how these things work. I'll use the word empathy, which is a very strange word to use in recruitment. You don't see it on the job descriptions of any recruiter that I've ever seen. No one asks for somebody who's empathetic. But we need that now, because the future of recruitment is about candidates, and we've got to understand the candidate journey. We've got to understand the candidate experience, and we've got to be sympathetic and empathetic to it, because clients are only going to pay us if we come up with candidates they can't find themselves. So that's critical. The digital, the future recruiter is going to be a promoter, as I mentioned, a marketer through content. Let me just mention this. Digital tools will amplify your personal brand, but your personal brand is built on the way you actually behave. You can't create a brand that isn't based on truth. So it goes right back to those candidate care skills that I think have been missing. As I mentioned, a recruiter will have superb influencing skills. They'll be skilled at identifying those moments of truth. In fact, creating those moments of truth where they can influence the outcome. And so many recruiters hide behind digital that they have no influencing skills at all. I mean, whoever influenced someone with an email? You influence someone by looking them in the eye, having a conversation, or at least on the telephone. And finally, I think they'll be great networkers. They'll be members of Generation C. So I'm a baby boomer, Ted. You're much younger than me. You're probably Generation Y, and then we got all the rest of them. But it's Generation C, which isn't anything to do with when you were born. It's the connected generation. It's people with reach. It's people who know people. It's people who know people both digitally through building a strong audience, but also in real life. They have a 1,000 cups of coffee a year. They're always meeting with people. They're always talking. They're networking. This is in the DNA of the recruiter. And there's a lot of recruiters who do nothing like that. They sit behind their desks. They text. They email. And they communicate digitally only, and they have no real connections, and that's not going to work.
Greg, we've talked about you coming out to the United States to do a master class or speak to an audience out here. For those who haven't experienced your master classes in other parts of the world, can you just tell us a little about what's in a master class and what it might take to get you out to North America?
Well, as you know, Ted, I've done a lot of it in Australia and New Zealand for many years, and actually got back last week from a tour around South Africa, which is a big economy. You know, there's 55 million people there, and we had 800 recruiters turn up over 2 days in Cape Town and Johannesburg. It was phenomenal. I think one of the reasons is they don't get a lot of international speakers. As you know, I've also gone around the UK, and my brother and I are doing a tour of 8 cities in the UK. There's 2 main angles we take. One is the masterclass around what we've talked about today. How to be prepared to be a great recruiter going forward. And that's typically a 4-hour exercise where we dig deep into the 6 pillars of the future fit recruiter, which are the things I've touched on: the sourcing, the branding, the networking, etc. But obviously in that, we go into a lot of detail. We like to think we leave people with at least 100 tips that they can go and use the next day. It's that kind of practical approach. And then we also have an owner's manager's angle that we take, similarly 4 hours, and that's what we like to say to owners and managers of recruitment companies: you better start to disrupt yourself before someone comes along and disrupts your business for you in the most painful way. And that's building a future fit business that's going to thrive in the future. I get a lot of engagement from recruiters and staffing people in the US, but I've never spoken there in recent times, and maybe between us, if there is interest from people on this call, we can put something together. I'd love to do it because I've got some great ideas, and I'd love to learn from the US market as well.
I want to just thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we'll get data from today's survey and make it available to people as they come back. Appreciate your time, and I'm really excited about sharing your insights and your views with our audience. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Ted, and thanks to Job Science. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for setting this up. Thanks for listening, everybody.